ESPN's Matt Miller released a full 7-round, 32-team NFL mock draft ahead of April's draft here in 2026. And on today's show, I figured I'd look at the Jacksonville Jaguars selections that Matt Miller made and just kind of break them down, my thoughts, overall reactions, and just overall opinions on Matt Miller's mock draft, which before we get into it, I'll just let you guys know now, there are some interesting picks. There's some great value. Overall, it's kind of a bit of a mixed bag. So without any further ado, we're going to get into today's show. But before we get into that, guys, do you guys want more Jaguars draft content here on the channel? Mock drafts, big boards maybe, whatever the case, we can provide that for you here at Jags Now. If you guys want more of that content, hit the like button. It's a great and free way to show support here at Jags Now. We greatly appreciate it. And without any further ado, let's get into today's show. Jacob Rodriguez at number 56 overall. This one immediately caught my attention whenever I opened up Matt Miller's kind of mock draft, and I scrolled to 56th overall saying, okay, where was he going to potentially go? And somehow the Texas Tech linebacker, who was one of the more productive just players in general for the Texas Tech Red Raiders and all of college football, really over the last 2 seasons. But you see the 2025 stats on your screen, 128 tackles, 4 interceptions, 10 pass breakups, 7 forced fumbles. I mean, you look at his numbers over the past 2 years, 255 tackles, 5 interceptions, 21.5 tackles for loss, 6 sacks, 10 pass breakups, 10 forced fumbles. This guy is somebody that if he were to somehow fall to 56 overall, I might personally, we film our shows here at Chat Sports in Dallas, Texas, I might personally book a car to get wherever the NFL draft is in Pittsburgh and just run the card in myself to draft Jacob Rodriguez at the 56 overall position. I think he would be an ideal Devin Lloyd replacement here in the NFL draft that could seamlessly fit right in. He'd be somebody that you would have on a rookie scale contract, and I would be floored to have an Anthony Campanelli's defense. The only problem is, and I kind of mentioned at the bottom of your screen, I don't think he gets there. I think he's arguably the 3rd best linebacker in this draft behind, depending on what you classify Arvell Reese as, and Sonny Styles. After that, to me, it's Jacob Rodriguez, and I respect C.J. Allen. He'd be a great addition. I don't know if he'll be there at 56th, but if he is there, James Gladstone, you better not mess it up. Get Rodriguez in Jacksonville. Moving into the 3rd round now, where things get a little interesting. And the first player that, out of the 3 third-round picks that the Jaguars had, that Matt Miller had the Jags selecting, was Bud Clark, the safety out of TCU. Now, I've done a little bit of research on Bud Clark. I think he's got some flexibility at the next level, playing either that slot nickel corner role, or he could play as a safety at the next level. And look, he was productive for the Horned Frogs this past season, and I think he's somebody that, if you are a defense that is looking to add talent on the back end, he'd certainly be a welcome addition. And if you're sitting there telling me that you think Bud Clark can replace Eric Murray's spot next to Antonio Johnson and be a starter for the Jaguars secondary in 2026, okay, you can sell me on that. Because ultimately, I think that if you're looking to upgrade that position, I think Eric Murray's really good to, fine level safety. I don't think he's a, all-pro caliber by any means. But if you think that Bud Clark, you have a vision of him and Antonio Johnson being your 2 safeties for the future, I can get behind this pick. If you think that he's more of a nickel at the next level, I just really don't see how, the Jaguars would draft Bud Clark, considering you have Jordan Lewis, you have Jarian Jones, you've got a lot of guys that can play that spot. So that would be the one kind of caveat I would have if you're going to draft Bud Clark this high. Then here's the first of maybe a couple of draft picks that Matt Miller had that I wasn't necessarily the biggest fan of. TJ Hall, the cornerback out of Iowa. Now, it's not to say that TJ Hall isn't worthy of the 88th overall selection. In a vacuum, I think over the last 2 seasons, he's really come on for the University of Iowa, had 11 pass breakups this past season, over 2 interceptions over the last couple of years. I just am not sure that a pure cornerback, whether he can play in the slot, whether he plays in the outside, depending on how Anthony Campanelli would view him, is a pressing need, right? You signed Monteric Brown right before the start of free agency to kind of lock in your top 4 corners in Travis Hunter, who's going to kind of make that more transition to being a starting level cornerback. You have Monteric Brown, you have Jordan Lewis, and you have Jarian Jones. That to me signals, okay, corner, what we thought could be a position of need for the Jaguars, that's no longer a pressing need. If you want to take, some cornerbacks for depth, I understand that. But if Bud Clark you view as a slot corner and you view TJ Hall as kind of more of a corner that would be in competition on the outside, I don't know if it's the best use of resources. And I think Miller kind of missed the boat potentially with these kind of 2 previous picks. Then we get on to pick number 100, the final of the 3 third-round picks, and he has the Jaguars selecting Emmett Johnson, the running back out of Nebraska, who I'm not necessarily the biggest fan when it comes to running backs in this draft class, but I do think that this is fine range for him. I prefer him more in the 4th round, but the end of the third's not the end of the world. And look, he was a productive back for the Nebraska Cornhuskers this past season. Over 250 carries, 1,400 rushing yards, 5.8 yards per carry, 46 receptions, 370 yards. I've kind of talked about him. I broke him down on the channel. I've actually taken him in a Jaguars mock draft. If you think if you're drafting Emmett Johnson here at Pick 100, he would be the number 2 running back behind Gracen Halton in the scenario. But the problem is you just signed Chris Rodriguez to kind of fill in that role. You still have LaQuint Allen, who I really like as an RB3. And I think Emmett Johnson, while he, doesn't necessarily provide anything that the Jaguars don't already have on the roster, right? Because he's not the most explosive. He's more of a guy that is a really good receiving back. You kind of have that in LaQuint Allen. I think even Gracen Halton can increase in that role the more reps he gets in the NFL. And he's somebody that works really well in, tight space and everything and can create yards after contact. Well, so can Chris Rodriguez, who you just signed from the Washington Commanders in free agency. So I'm not really necessarily saying that this is a bad pick because, look, if you're not sold on Chris Rodriguez being the RB2, I don't mind necessarily going running back, but I think it's more likely that the Jaguars are set at that position rather than investing one of their third-round picks in it, unless a guy like Jadarian Price were to fall, or if you fall in love with Jonah Coleman, who the Jaguars met at the NFL Combine. I just don't know if Emmett Johnson would be the ideal selection here for the Jags in the 3rd round. So I think it's really, to be honest, if I had to pick whether the Jags were going to draft a running back, especially in those first kind of 4 picks, I would lean no. Could they maybe take one on day 3? Sure, but I would consider it unlikely. But I want you guys to tell me, should the Jaguars add a running back during the 2026 NFL Draft? Type Y for yes, type in for no. Again, I just don't feel like it's a necessary need when you have other positions on the roster that, Matt Miller and the Jaguars haven't addressed up to this point in this kind of mock draft. Where's the defensive tackles? Where's the edges? I just think that there's other directions that the Jags could go. With the 4th round pick at number 124 overall, Matt Miller has the Jaguars selecting Josh Cameron, wide receiver out of Baylor. Now, this is good range for him. I actually don't mind this pick in general. I think that Josh Cameron is one of the more unique wide receiver prospects in all of college football. He's kind of built like a running back. I think he's over 220-plus pounds. Had a really good Senior Bowl. He can play on the outside. He's not afraid to fight for 50-50 balls. Has really good run-after-catch ability. He just doesn't have the explosiveness nor the, imposing physical frame to be an outside receiver at the next level. He does also provide special teams value. He returned some punts at Baylor. He didn't run the best at his pro day. It was either the pro day or the combine, one of the two. He ran a 4.6. He's not going to be the most explosive athlete. But in terms of adding to that wide receiver room after, again, the big 3 and Brian Thomas Jr., Parker Washington, Jacoby Myers, you obviously Travis Hunter in situational spots, I think Josh Cameron could actually provide this room with a bit of an extra boost. So I don't mind this pick from Miller. Again, the first, 4 picks, it's got me in a little bit of a loop right now. Then we get to arguably the steal of this entire draft from Matt Miller. Gracen Halton, the defensive tackle out of Oklahoma, who, if you guys are subscribed and have your notifications turned on, you would have known that in my last mock draft, I actually traded down, still in the 2nd round, and took Gracen Halton with the Jaguars' first draft pick in my latest mock draft. And Miller has him falling all the way to the 5th round. I think this guy is going to be a day 1 contributor as a defensive tackle. He's a little bit undersized, but you see the production. 8.5 sacks over the last 2 seasons, 13 tackles for loss. By far. I did a pretty good extensive look into this mock draft by Matt Miller. This would be one of the biggest draft steals by far at a position of need for the Jacksonville Jaguars. So you kind of sit there and say, okay, you didn't really address defensive tackle on day 2, but you're able to get Gracen Halton in the 5th? That's obscene value in my opinion. I think at worst he'll go 3rd round. For you to get him in the 5th, I think he's a hell of a prospect. I think he's one of the better defensive tackles that's only been rising since the NFL Combine. So credit to Miller for this one. Again, some of these picks have been kind of questionable, I guess I could say. But Gracen Halton landing him in the 5th. Can't complain. Moving on to the second 5th round pick that the Jacksonville Jaguars had, and it's Alex Harkey, the kind of offensive lineman who played tackle at the University of Oregon, but I think he could have a role at guard at the next level. 6'6", 327 pounds, had a 67.5 PFF grade. I talked to our Oregon host here at Chat Sports, Will Ortner, who does a great job of covering the Oregon Ducks. You guys should make sure you check him out. And he just kind of said him and World, the other tackle for the Oregon Ducks, this past season, really underwhelmed. And he views Harkey as somebody that would be best served as a guard at the NFL level. So I don't necessarily mind this. The Jaguars could always use some depth, preferably at that swing tackle spot. So if you do see him as a potential swing tackle option, I don't mind this pick. But even if you get him as offensive guard depth, I wouldn't hate the pick either, which ironically is where they go with their 6th-round pick in DJ Campbell, who I think that, again, if they view Harkey as an offensive tackle option and they have DJ Campbell as your offensive guard option, the Jaguars do need depth along their offensive line. I think that they're, kind of first 5 in terms of their depth chart. You obviously have Cole Van Lannon. You have Anton Harrison. You have those guys as your book-in tackles there along your offensive line. And then you got guys like Robert Hainsey. You've got Ezra Cleveland. You've got Patrick McCarry. Hopefully he looks better after the back injury he suffered last season. Those are going to be your starting offensive linemen. However, you are sitting there if you're Jacksonville. I would like to add some depth. I like Wyatt Milam as a potential kind of guard option behind either Cleveland or McCarry. I like Jonah Monheim as a backup center. And then just that backup tackle and maybe having another guard there on your offensive line, I think really could complete this offensive line if you're Jacksonville. Getting into the final 3 draft picks for the Jags, and these are just kind of your 7th-round picks I just wanted to highlight on screen. Avery Smith, the cornerback out of Toledo. So Jacksonville doubled, potentially even triple dips, depending on where you view Bud Clark. The cornerback out of Toledo in the 7th round. I get that you do need to add bodies there, but I'm not necessarily sure if 2 cornerbacks is the best route to go. You guys let me know down in the comments section. James Thompson Jr., who actually was a pretty productive defensive tackle out of the University of Illinois, but do value him as more of kind of a 7th-round UDFA type. You snag him in the 7th round, so you get another defensive tackle. And then Armaj Reed Adams, so another offensive lineman there in the 7th. Again, would he be a camp body? Would he be somebody that could potentially compete for a roster spot? This is kind of the end of the draft, so I don't necessarily hate that, but taking 3 potential offensive guards is not something that I will look at as ideal. So there you have it. This is Matt Miller's full 7-round mock draft for the Jacksonville Jaguars. I'll just quickly read off the names here. Jake Rodriguez in the 2nd round of number 56 overall. Then your 3 third-round picks in Bud Clark, TJ Hall, Emmett Johnson. Josh Cameron there in the 4th round with Gracen Halton, I think inarguably as the biggest steal in the 5th round out of Oklahoma. Then you have Alex Harkey, DJ Campbell, Avery Smith, James Thompson Jr., and Armaj Reed Adams to round things out. That was Matt Miller's full 7-round mock draft. I want you to grade this mock draft. You guys have seen my mock drafts on the channel, and I want you to grade Matt Miller's, who, again, he does this for a living, so I'd be very curious to know what grades you would give him. Grade this, A, B, C, D, or F, down below in the comments section. And if you made it to the end of today's video, guys, we greatly appreciate it. Like I said, if you want more Jags draft content on the channel, give us a like, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And until next time, Jags fans, we'll see you on the next one. Peace out.